The next morning, Ariana and I headed east along the simple dirt road for the capital city of Kathaleen, about a 4-day march away. The elven fighter Ariana, who joined me to help prevent the assassination of Representative Margaret back in Tobin, continued to march by my side, quiet and distant. In fact, I was surprised she was with me, as she was still grieving heavily over the death of her brother Benjamin, and I fumbled for the right words to say. "I am glad you're with me," I finally said, hoping to at least provide a little comfort to the elf. I couldn't imagine the pain Ariana was enduring after watching her only brother savagely fed to the nemesis plant by the Chagarian Darius and his lackey Rachel, devoured alive right before her eyes. But I was glad that she'd agreed to remain in my adventuring party and help me investigate the reports of undead attacking Kathaleen. She was a good soul and I would need her help. Several minutes passed, and in my awkward compassion I again spoke to Ariana, trying to be wise. "The pain won't last forever, Ariana," I began, the words seemingly appropriate, or so I thought. "Stop," Ariana insisted, not interested in my words. "You have no idea how painful this is, and how it will haunt me forever. I don't want to hear it." As I feared, I had just made things worse. Surprisingly, however, Ariana changed the subject, at least continuing the conversation. "Tell me more about this Kathaleen we're headed to. I know we elves aren't welcomed there. What did the representative tell you again?" "We're to investigate why the undead are attacking the city," I recalled. Margaret's words burned into my memory. "Oh yes, she also said something about there being more going on than we can possibly know. That's been bothering me to no end." "It takes a lot of hatred to raise the dead," Ariana commented, the elf frowning. "And an entire army of them? The two of us can't stop an entire army." I had been thinking the same thing. I would need a lot of help in Kathaleen. While taking on an army of undead wasn't something I could succeed at, of course, I couldn't help but feel that Representative Margaret wouldn't send me on such a quest if I couldn't somehow resolve it. Surely, I would find the help I needed to deal with the situation and best resolve the quest. The brief conversation then ended, both of us returning to our own individual thoughts. A few days later, and now halfway between Tobin to the west and Kathaleen to the northeast, we reached a simple intersection in the road, a second trail leading off towards the mountains to the north. As we approached, we noticed another person nearing the intersection from the north as well, marching at a brisk pace and smiling as if he didn't have a care in the world. Indeed, the young man's grin was almost obnoxious, but he didn't seem to be any sort of threat. Tall, thin, well-developed, and handsome, the human was dressed in newly made clothes appropriate for a long trek in the wild, and I couldn't tell if he was a simple merchant, a traveler, or even an adventurer. As the young man approached to within speaking distance, I lowered my guard, said hello and asked him where he was headed. "Hail, and well met, travelers," the encountered stranger began, his voice a little gloating yet still respectful. "I am Redfern, just returning from Mount Rebirth, a new wizard of the world, and headed home to Kathaleen. It appears you're headed there as well?" "Mount Rebirth?" I asked, unfamiliar with the presumed location. "What's that? You've never heard of Mount Rebirth?" Redfern asked, genuinely surprised. "It's where the most powerful of heroes go to become a special kind of magic user. In fact, I am a reborn truistic now, perhaps destined to sit on the inner circle itself one day." "A reborn wizard? A truistic? Destined for the inner circle?" This Redfern character was using several terms I wasn't familiar with, and I turned to Ariana for help. While any intelligent human or elf can become a regular magic user, only a tiny fraction has the mindset, inner strength, and ability to be reborn atop Mount Rebirth and become a truistic, Ariana whispered into my ear, both of us remaining transfixed on Redfern. If this Redfern is telling the truth, he's become quite the powerful hero. While the claims of Redfern were certainly bold, it didn't seem like he was lying. Hence, it appeared I had met my first genuine truistic, and I wondered how powerful he had become. "I've been gone for almost a year," Redfern continued, looking northeast in the direction of Kathaleen. "Since it appears you're headed there as well, why don't we journey together? There is safety in numbers, you know." Ariana and I looked at one another, surprised but recognizing that we could use the help. So, I agreed, and we welcomed Redfern into our party. Having never lost his smile, Redfern nodded in agreement and extended his arm in the direction of Kathaleen, inviting us to proceed. Continuing our way toward Kathaleen, Redfern told us more about himself, how he had been born and raised in Kathaleen, how his father lost his way, eventually becoming an ultimate in Chegaria to wield magic, at the cost of his conscience, and how his father forced Redfern to mount rebirth to become a genuine wizard. At that point, Redfern and his father parted ways. That was several weeks ago, and now Redfern was returning home for the first time in nearly a year. The whole story sounded a little far-fetched, so I attempted to perhaps poke a few holes in Redfern's story. It all seemed at least plausible, however, and I could certainly relate to the hardship of dealing with a sorcerer who turned evil from the consumption of the nymphoid plant. But Redfern did also seem to hide a few crucial details regarding the separation of himself and his father, and it quickly became something he wouldn't talk about. An hour later, a halfling merchant approached us from the direction of Kathaleen, the middle-aged man leading a donkey packed with goods and supplies. The man noticed us, of course, but didn't seem interested in conversation, about to walk right past us. As the merchant passed by, I stepped into his way, forcing him to a stop. He briefly looked at me but then turned away and continued, trying to avoid eye contact. The merchant wasn't just nervous, he was scared, and I could feel it. So, I asked what was wrong and what had him so spooked. Don't go to Kathaleen, not now," the halfling uttered, terror clearly embedded in his words. Death is everywhere. It stalks the land, is invading the city. Flee, while you still can." I knew things were wrong in Kathaleen, but were they so bad to cause such fear? Surely the odd halfling could tell us more. The three of us then drilled the merchant with questions. Utterly overwhelmed, he simply threw his arms up in the air and hurried forward, pulling his donkey with all his might to escape our encounter and get away as quickly as he could. We watched as the merchant quickly departed, surprised by the encounter but perhaps equally warned as well. "By thunder!" Redfern exclaimed, as surprised as Ariana and me. "Death is everywhere? Is he referring to undead? Are they still attacking Kathaleen?" "What do you mean still attacking?" I asked, hoping Redfern would clarify. "Yeah, small groups of undead were attacking Kathaleen just as father and I left about a year ago," Redfern offered, clearly surprised. "It sounds like the attacks have gotten worse." "Low-level undead like that can't think for themselves," Ariana countered. "Someone must be controlling them." "Then it's our job to find out," Redfern concluded, sensing a growing mystery. The way forward could get dangerous. Redfern and Ariana looked to me as their presumed leader. I smiled and nodded, my inner spirit enough to convince the magic user and fighter that I was the right person to lead them to success. The conversation then ended and we embarked eastward toward Kathaleen again. The next day, we found ourselves in the heart of the swamp just southwest of Kathaleen. Dark shadows played with my imagination, a cool wind tickled the back of my neck, and I recognized how glad I would be to pass through this mysterious place and reach the city of Kathaleen just a few hours away. Suddenly, Ariana retrieved her bow and nocked an arrow, concerned about something ahead. Indeed, it didn't take long for us to reach a human corpse lying face down on the road, and the find left us uneasy. Ariana looked around again for a moment, making sure no surprise attack was imminent. As Redfern and I watched, Ariana examined the back of the corpse. Finding little interest, she then used her foot to push the body over, the corpse rolling on its back and the sight ghastly. "Notice the eyes, the whites replaced with inky darkness," Redfern instructed. "I've seen this before, this is no ordinary corpse." "It's a zombie," Ariana correctly concluded, the creature hard to look at. "This monster was recently raised from the dead by evil forces." The corpse looked fresh, dead perhaps just a few days. It had also been through some sort of battle, as it bore numerous cuts and bruises and its face looked like a large rock had struck it. However, it was the huge open wound across its chest that drew the most attention. "The chest wound, it's still fresh," Ariana observed, surprising Redfern and me. "I think this person was just slain within the last hour or so." Surprised by the observation, I bent down to examine the trauma more closely. Sure enough, fresh blood continued to ooze from the massive wound. This person had just been killed a short time ago. As the three of us stood over the bleeding corpse, a sudden shout ripped through the air nearby, a cry more of alarm than pain or desperation. Peering into the distance, I thought I saw several humanoid shapes but really couldn't tell. While initially wanting to just bury the poor soul here, I instead instructed both Redfern and Ariana to follow the shout and investigate. Ariana knocked her bow again, then we proceeded deeper into the marshland and in the direction of the cry ahead. My heart beginning to race as we quickly stepped forward, the three of us tried to keep out of sight as we maneuvered to learn more about the situation ahead. Several further humanoid shouts tore through the air beyond. It was clear that someone was engaged in mortal combat. A moment later, we found a sole dark-skinned human fighter engaged in battle against several skeletons. Looking about, we also saw the smashed corpses of 3 other skeletons. The fighter had certainly been busy. However, the human appeared exhausted and we weren't sure how much longer he could last. Recognizing he needed our immediate help, we then taunted the skeletons, luring them toward us instead and buying the wounded hero some needed time. As combat with the skeletons became imminent, I knew of course that the 4 of us were stronger together than apart. Recognizing our intentions of helping him, the fighter acknowledged our presence with a slight grin and re-engaged the skeletons, his confidence restored. "Your timing is keen," the human whispered between deep breaths, turning to face the 4 remaining skeletons by our side. "I am Huelsman. Let's get him." Although the skeletons had no flesh left upon them whatsoever, they were surprisingly quick, agile warriors, armed with short swords and shields and fully trained in the art of combat. I also quickly noticed that our bladed weapons didn't harm them as much, those of us with blunt weapons switching to those instead. The 4 of us against the 4 undead monsters, each of us engaged with a single skeleton, fighting as hard as we could. Ariana was the first to defeat her opponent and joined Redfern against the monster fighting him, the magic user not very experienced in hand-to-hand combat. Despite the challenges, and all of us suffering a few superficial wounds, we soon managed to destroy all 4 skeletons, smashing them to pieces. Victory was ours. The battle over, Huelsman thanked us for the help as he reached for some hidden bandages to nurse his wounds. However, the warrior remained serious as he explained that the small group of skeletons that had just attacked us were not the only undead in the area, and that more of them were likely headed for Kathaleen. "So it's true, then," Redfern began, helping Ariana to pick through the bones. "Undead continue to assault the people of Kathaleen." Perhaps not recognizing that Redfern was a magic user, Huelsman looked at him and the mighty warrior froze, as if he'd just spotted a mortal enemy. Indeed, the eyes of Huelsman flew open for a moment and I felt a sudden gush of painful emotion explode from the warrior, as if Redfern were somehow evil incarnate. Something very negative was about to happen, but there was little I could do to stop it. You're one of them, aren't you?" Huelsman barked at Redfern, drawing his weapon as if under attack. "You mean a magic user?" Redfern returned, surprised. "Why, yes. I am just recently reborn. I am Redfern." The wizard softly smiled and took a few steps toward the mighty warrior, about to officially greet him. Huelsman in turn took a defensive stance, raising his weapon and warning Redfern not to step any further. Ariana and I watched as the strange scene unfolded, Huelsman totally mistrusting of Redfern. The young truistic smiled again, recognizing the misunderstanding for what it was, and gently laid his hand on Huelsman's shoulder to comfort him. "Worry not, stranger. You have nothing to fear from me." Clearly hating the physical contact, Huelsman's inner rage immediately flooded him and he punched the hapless magic user backward, Redfern falling to the ground alongside one of the destroyed skeletons. Before the truistic could act, Huelsman then leaped forward, about to attack Redfern. Shocked by the sudden altercation, I sprang forward to somehow try and block Huelsman's imminent attack, wondering what could have caused him to behave in such a dastardly way in the first place. The quick action worked and Huelsman halted his attack at the last moment. Huelsman then stepped forward again and held the tip of his blade to the throat of the confused wizard, his response chilling. "Be thankful. You're only the second sorcerer to ever touch me, and live." The two stared at one another for several moments, Huelsman's absolute hatred both obvious and surprising. The estranged warrior then turned and walked away back into the swamp, leaving our party and, thankfully, sparing Redfern's life. Still stunned by the sudden altercation, Redfern slowly regained his feet, his very close brush with death shocking. "Another wizard hater," the rattled hero exclaimed as he watched Huelsman disappear into the distance. "One more in a world that blames all their problems on the reborn like me. There is probably more undead roaming around," Ariana added, also surprised by the altercation. "We should go." Huelsman now out of sight, the 3 of us agreed and turned back for the road, more than ready to escape the marshland and reach Kathaleen beyond as quickly as we could. The road soon led to the large and bustling city of Kathaleen. We had finally arrived, soon reaching the southwestern city limits. A tremendous wall of trees, vines, and thick vegetation surrounded the metropolis, making the massive wooden gate ahead the only obvious entrance into the capital city. However, the road was strangely quiet and the gate ahead appeared secure yet desolate, our only option being to proceed to the main gate and look around. Lom Tora, it's quiet, Redfern suggested, suddenly nervous. Perhaps too quiet, something is amiss. Yes, I could feel a sort of tension in the air as well, like something terrible was about to happen. Ariana felt it too, the fighter drawing her weapon in defense. Despite everything this past year, it is good to be home, Redfern suggested, still concerned. However, this isn't the reception I expected. Yes, where is everyone? Ariana added, growing more concerned. The road here shows the passage of hundreds, where did they all go? That's what we're here to find out, the wizard answered, pointing toward the main gate in the near distance and leading the party forward. The massive wooden gate here was perhaps 20 feet wide and rigged to open and close from within through a complex mix of ropes, pulleys, and levers. Indeed, a small contingent of soldiers normally operated the gate, but, at the moment, I didn't see a single soul. Ariana shook her head in disbelief. Again, where was everyone? Redfern acknowledged the question and suggested that the party look around. A quick search of the immediate surroundings revealed nothing, however, it was as if the entire town had either hidden itself away deep within the city or had left altogether. The gate itself was massive and quite secure, we simply couldn't get through it. By thunder, it appears we're not alone. Redfern then mumbled, pointing south. The three of us turned and watched in horror as a small army of undead monsters approached. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, of skeletons, zombies, and even ghouls marched toward our destination as if the three of us were their intended target. With our backs to the gate and now cornered, it seemed like we had three options: climb the main gate, escape back to the marshland, or, foolishly stand and fight. Giving the order to try and make a break for it and escape back into the marshland, we quickly recognized dozens and dozens of slow, rambling corpses approaching from that direction as well. Escape to the southwest was suddenly out of the question. A voice then called from behind the gate, more a whisper I could barely make out. Hey, you three. You don't look like undead. If we let you in, will you fight to save our city? Redfern nodded and all of us signaled our intentions affirmatively. Not sure we can trust you, the guard shouted from above, obviously wary, but nobody deserves to die at the hands of these fiends. Hurry, come inside. There was an uncomfortably long wait. The large wooden door finally groaned open and each of us darted inside as the undead army shambled to almost striking range. The door closed and the undead army kept at bay. Our party entered a small courtyard filled with all manner of warriors, from city guards to local mercenaries to barely trained teenagers who represented a last line of defense. Clearly the city of Kathaleen was under siege, and we had arrived just in time. A tall fighter dressed in regal plate armor, the obvious leader here within the walls of Kathaleen, then stepped forward, quite curious with all of us. Introducing himself as Lord Robert, he drew a gleaming, magical longsword before demanding to know more about us and why we were here. I was ordered here by Representative Margaret from Tobin to help against these undead attacks, I stated, the king-like warrior rather intimidating. What can we do? Robert stared intensively at us, then thanked both the inner circle as well as us for our surprise intervention. It appeared that he had believed my response unconditionally. Incoming fireball. Interrupting our conversation with Lord Robert, I looked back toward the main gate just in time as a tremendous ball of fire suddenly struck the outside of the massive door, fire and dust blowing out from the seams and knocking us to the ground. The same lookout guard above called down again, genuine fear etched in his voice. It's her. It's the angel of death. Here comes another fireball. Unprepared for the blast, a few of the closer guards looked like they were about to be severely burned. My altruism kicking in, I quickly took a stand between the explosion and everyone else, helping to ensure that nobody was hurt. Lord Robert nodded and joined me, as did Redfern and Ariana moments later. She's the one leading this undead army against us. Lord Robert spat, now just 10 feet away from the main gate. We don't know why she's attacking us, but she needs to die. Yet another blast struck the main gate again, fire, smoke and debris flying everywhere just above us and nearly knocking me down again. Completely on fire now, I doubted whether the main gate could survive another attack. Robert barked out several final orders, his ragtag assemblage of heroes doing their best to prepare for imminent combat. The Lord then turned to us, his concern obvious. You three, let's stand together and drive these monsters back to hell. What say you? Immediately agreeing with the powerful hero, a final fireball blasted the main gate again, this time blowing the massive construction off its hinges and knocking all of us to the ground. The undead horde then began to spill into the courtyard. The fight to save Kathaleen was on. As the undead army poured into courtyard, it was immediately met by the brave forces of Kathaleen, hundreds of soldiers willing to risk it all to save their city and repel the monstrous undead. Lord Robert temporarily joined our party and we spent the next hour locked in terrible combat, the undead attacking in several waves and definitely all we could handle. Leading the charge were nearly 100 skeletons, similar to the ones we had defeated back in the marshland, but at least a dozen of them bearing bows and crossbows as well, able to shoot us from a distance. A second wave consisted of dozens of zombies, the slow-moving but powerful monsters still possessing most of their flesh and quite horrible to behold. Attacking us with short swords, we found their flesh hard to damage with our blunt weapons and quickly changed over to edged weapons to defeat them. During a temporary lull in the battle, I watched as the diversity of Kathaleen defenders continued to fight furiously amongst the undead, struggling as if the entire universe was at stake. As the epic battle continued, a large bear skeleton then approached us to attack. The undead beast not only tried to bite us but raked at us with its fearsome claws as well and seemed to have a knack of first attacking the most wounded party member amongst us. Switching to a magical mace, Lord Robert soon defeated the bear skeleton, causing it to collapse into a pile of bones and causing a collective cheer to go up around us. The undead army had been defeated. Having stood by Robert's side throughout the battle, I smiled as the strong hero thrust his sword high into the air and screamed in triumph, leading everyone in a long shout of victory. Several Huelsman clerics then emerged from the collection of remaining Kathaleen defenders, offering to completely heal our party for its valiant defense of the city. Standing there, I continued to watch as the defenders of Kathaleen cheered and congratulated one another, Lord Robert thanking us again for our participation in the epic battle. Moments later, however, several loud horns began to wail in the background, and Robert ordered everyone to be silent. The horns continued and Lord Robert's grin turned to intense anger as he recognized the truth of the situation. It's been a diversion. They're attacking the church, they're after the Lefeshard. Robert ordered our party to remain behind in case there were any more undead to deal with, his trust in us apparent. The proclaimed Lord of Kathaleen then turned and dashed into the city, leading most of his remaining troops to the Huelsman temple deep within the capital. We watched them disappear, fearful that the diversion was likely successful and the life's hard relic had already been lost to this angel of death. And that's a wrap of episode number 6, on to Kathaleen. Expect additional episodes every few weeks as the story continues.